All right, ladies and gentlemen, Quan is a dear friend. First time I don't even remember where I first saw Quan, but I've seen Quan on multiple occasions before I really got to know him more and more. His predecessor at Liberty University, Melanie Pearl, was an astonishing figure that I met when I first got here in Lynchburg 3 years ago. Melanie was just a wonderful, wonderful person. She was the executive director of their Center for Me, I believe, the diversity, basically the diversity section there at Liberty. And she was just doing such great work. And I really appreciated the conversation she and I were having and hopes and dreams we were having about what we could be doing to bring up some of the most important topics, especially around queer issues and racial issues. Boy, we were really talking through about what could become. Unfortunately, Melanie's time was cut by a change at Liberty. I guess a bit over a year later, year and a half later, and then. But Quan took some leadership there. I mean, he was already rising up, and then was diversity retention director. And but what a great guy! I've served on the diversity center board with him, and just a wonderful person to know and really really admire, and to see his courage, as many of you have already read the Washington Post article, the Higher Ed article, the Chronicle of Higher Ed, also. Thanks to just recently coming out, the Christianity Today article had a lot of amazing information in it. But Quan has left Liberty. I'm not going to give any details. I'll let him do that. But he's also started a movement, and I want us to really listen and see how we can just listen. We want to listen and see what we can do as far as just listening and taking direction from people like Quan. Quan, one of these wonderful leaders. Quan, please share with us a bit about you and your story, and we're all ears.
Yeah. Pastor Dan, thank you so much for allowing me to come share this space with you and your amazing church. It's been really great to also see the work that y'all have been doing, just how unapologetically y'all have been supporting the community and supporting every part of the community. And I just appreciate that so much. So thank you for letting me come this morning and share this space with y'all. So many of you may not know my story. So I guess I'll give you a little bit of background about myself before I just dive into things. I grew up in a couple different places. I don't have necessarily a place that I call my hometown. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and then I lived there for a good portion of my childhood. And then I've lived in South Carolina, North Carolina, Guam, and Virginia since then. I came to Lynchburg in 2012, and prior to that, I was on Guam. I was finishing up high school, and I was trying to figure out, where I was going to go get my education. And through a chain of events, I ended up deciding to come to Liberty. I had no idea about anything related to Lynchburg or to Liberty. I actually, a lot of the research I did on Liberty was through their student blogs and student vlogs on YouTube. And that's how I was doing a lot of research for schools, because I found that a lot of schools were really quick to tell you the best parts about themselves on their about page and their admissions portion and through the recruiters. But if you really want to know about the experience of a school, ask the students who are actually there. So I was following a lot of them, and the experience looked great. So I was like, okay, well, let me come on down there. Came over in 2012. I actually started working at the university in 2013, my sophomore/junior year, and then went full time in 2014, and ended up graduating in 2015. I worked in 3 different departments while at Liberty. I worked in information technology and the student advocate office, which is predominant, like their main goal is to retain students residentially. And then I moved over to the Office of Equity and Inclusion, which their entire goal is to zero in on our minority and marginalized populations at the university and find our ways that we need to support them, we need to retain them, and we need to enrich the campus by their experience and for their experience. So that's a little bit about me and my background. Before I dive in too much further, I'd like to share with you guys, if it's okay, just some scripture that I had been, coincidentally enough, working through with my nephew. He's been staying with me the last couple months, and I was working with him right before um, I decided to turn in my letter of resignation. So it's actually from Psalm 107. So it says, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so, whom he has redeemed from trouble and gathered in from the lands from the east and from the west, from the north and from the south. Some wandered in desert wastes, finding no way to a city to dwell in, hungry and thirsty, their soul fainted within them. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He led them by a straight way till they reached a city to dwell in. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man. For he satisfies the longing soul, and the hungry soul he fills with good things. Some sat in darkness and in the shadow of death, prisoners in affliction and in irons, for they had rebelled against the words of God and spurned the counsel of Most High. So he bowed their hearts down with hard labor. They fell down with none to help. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He brought them out of the darkness in the shadow of death and burst their bonds apart. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man. For he shadows the doors of bronze, and he cuts into the bars of iron. Some were fools through their sinful ways, and because of their iniquities suffered affliction. They loathed any kind of food, and they drew near to the gates of death. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He sent out his word and healed them and delivered them from their destruction. Let them thank the Lord for their steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man, and let them offer sacrifices of thanksgiving and tell of his deeds and songs of joy. Some went down to the sea in ships, doing business on the great waters. They saw the deeds of the Lord, his wondrous works in the deep, for he commanded and raised the stormy wind, which lifted up the waves of the sea. They mounted up to heaven. They went down to the depths of their courage, melted away their evil plight. They reeled and staggered like drunken men and were at their wits' end. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. Then they were glad that the waters were quiet, and he brought them to their desired haven. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man. Let them extol him in the congregation of the people and praise him in the assembly of the elders. He turns rivers into desert, springs of water into thirsty ground, a fruitful land into a salty waste because of the evil of its inhabitants. He turned a desert into pools of water and parched land into springs of water. And there he lets the hungry dwell, and they establish a city to live in. They sow fields and plant vineyards and get a fruitful yield. By his blessing, they multiply greatly, and he does not let their livestock diminish. When they are diminished and brought low through oppression, evil, and sorrow, he pours contempt on princes and makes them wander in trackless wastes. But he raises up the needy out of affliction, and he makes their families like flocks. The upright see it and are glad, and all wickedness shuts its mouth. Whoever is wise, let him attend to these things. Let them consider the steadfast love of the Lord. I was reading through that and really trying to work through a lot of my own situation. And I just couldn't help but begin to feel an overwhelming just weight of God's love. So over, the past year, it's been really difficult for me to consistently stay in communion with God, because just life circumstances happening and seeing how the people, like, blaming God for his people, and looking at the actions of his people and being like, God, I just cannot, I can't understand why you would allow some of this some of these things to happen, why this is going unchallenged, why you're allowing people to use your word in such hateful ways. And they're claiming your name. They're claiming that this is being done by your order, but this just doesn't align. And so it's been very like difficult. And so when I started, really trying to dive back into God's word and really try to connect back with him, it's funny, like I was going back through Psalms and Proverbs, and I continued to come across like, God is so good, God is so good, God is so good. And despite the fact that I hadn't even resigned yet, I knew, I was like, God, you are good, and you are showing up in a big way right now, and not just in my personal life, but you are showing up in a big way in the world, and in our nation, and you are making people see what is happening here. A thought that like has been reverberating in my mind over and over and over and over again is this: God is tired of the oppression of his people, and he is tired of people using his name to do it. And I cannot get that thought out of my head and get that out of my spirit. And I feel like God has been showing that and making it clear over and over again, not just in my situation, but again, in our nation, in the world. People are marching all over the world because they are tired. They are sick of it. And for too long, we have really use scripture, use God's character in such a gross way to oppress people. In my position at Liberty, I was responsible for the retention of our minority students and our marginalized students, and I was responsible for advocating for them. And I continued to face so many obstacles. There's so many times where, I'd be told, I can't do this or I can't do that, or facing the issues and leadership, seeing that the people who were in these positions weren't in any way qualified to be in those positions, seeing that they were actively working against the people that they were supposed to protect, that they were just being used as pawns, really. And it just got so frustrating. And I finally got to the point where I said to myself, I cannot continue to tell people to come here, to tell Black people to send their children, some of their most prized possessions, to this institution that I know is going to be working against them in so many different levels, from the levels of like microaggressions that go unchallenged and are commonplace and almost considered just part of the culture at the institution, to even bigger ways where, they are actively bringing in speakers who speak against the Black experience and speak against the oppression that Black people actually face, and then validating their experience and identity. I could not do that anymore. And so the morning when of June 2nd, when I decided, okay, this is it, I'm going to resign, I actually went up to Liberty Mountain, and I went up there with my friend and coworker, and I said, Jasmine, will you just pray with me? And she just, she sat there and prayed with me. And I asked God, I said, God, if this is what you would have me do, or if this is not what you would have me do, I pray that you shake me harder than you've ever shaken me before. I pray that you shout at me louder than you've ever shouted at me before. I pray that you be so clear and so evident in my life that there is no way that I can ignore you. And I then asked, but if this is okay, and if I'm not going against your will, Lord, I just pray that you continue to give me peace. Because the odd part was I had a peace already. I already knew like in the deepest parts of me, I felt peace, which was so odd for me as someone who has tied their success as a person and tied their identity into how well they do within the workplace or professionally. Um, as a little bit of background, I'm the first person in my immediate family to graduate high school and to then earn a college degree. And so for me, professional success has been such an important part of who I am, the DNA of who I am. And for me to reach that point where I felt a peace about letting that go and saying goodbye to it, and not having a backup or a plan or any sort of like, okay, well, I know I'll go work here, I know I'll go do that, um was, I mean, it was monumental for me, just in my identity. And God gave me such a peace, and not only did he give me a peace, he continued to open up so many different doors and remove so many different obstacles. After I went to turn in my letter of resignation, I went and gave it to the executive vice president. And I don't know if any of you have read the letter of resignation. I did not really hold back in the words that I spoke. I spoke truth. And the executive vice president, who was the chief diversity officer's boss, he's a white man, and he said, Quan, I don't understand your experience. I don't know what it's like to be a Black man on this campus, but what I'm starting to understand is that it is difficult and that it is hard. And instead of him being upset when being challenged with these different things, he was actually very receptive of it, which I appreciated. Um, and then from there, I actually, when I was packing my office, somebody else who was high up at Liberty, who's been there since like 1978, they were leaving to go be at another institution. And it was because of these same reasons. And they said to me, Quan, I didn't really understand white privilege, and this man is pretty old. I mean, or not, old in a bad way, but I mean, not that there is a bad way. Let me get my foot out my mouth. So so he's an older gentleman, and he is explaining to me, I did not understand what white privilege was. And he says, I grew up in a poor family, and I thought that white privilege was something that was just made up, because if if that's the case, then I shouldn't have had the life experience that I had. But he said, through recent conversations and through seeing what's happening in the world, he realized that his whiteness allowed him different opportunities that could not be afforded to someone else who came from the same circumstances that he did, or had the same starting point. And he understood that his whiteness helped him along the way, even in ways that he didn't always understand it or ask for. And he said, and I'm realizing that a lot of the rhetoric that I have espoused was wrong. And so for him to say that was, I feel like, really big. And it was yet another way that God was showing up. The night that I turned in my letter of resignation, I remember being at my friend Jasmine's house, and my friend Thomas being there, and literally starting to like just break down and praise God, because I had, again, no idea of what I would be doing next or where I would be going. But my friend Thomas goes, I spoke to my previous employer for my part-time job, and they said that they're willing to hire you on until you find something else, no questions asked. I hadn't even started looking for another source of income. I hadn't even started trying to figure this out. And God was already letting me know, I've got you. I'm going to take care of you. And through this, it has just been so amazing to see how he has continually showed up. It's so hard to take different steps. And I'll be the first to say, I'm no one special. I got to a point where I felt led to go and do something. But I believe that this is fully God in the midst and him working. And since then, I've looked at that and I've seen how good God is. And I've heard from so many other coworkers and so many other colleagues, some of them crying and saying, you know, I wish that I could leave as well. I wish that I didn't have to be there. I wish that I could make it out, but I have a family. I have kids. I'm working on my degree, or there's no other job in Lynchburg that I could really take and still get health benefits. I have one person has MS, and so she's not really able to find employment that will cover the health benefits she needs. But she's telling me about how in the middle of department-wide meetings, they're using racial slurs toward her and thinking it's okay. And so I'm hearing this and I'm like, this is heartbreaking, because again, I'm no one special. Like me being able to leave and seeing the goodness of God, like they should be able to see it as well, and they should be able to experience it. And so that's why I started the LU Underground Railroad. I truly do believe that no one should be subject to racial or workplace trauma. If you want to go and earn a living, you should be able to just go and earn a living. And you shouldn't have to be afraid about your very identity being attacked, or your you and your experience being come against. Um, you know, a lot of times people will use terms like, "Oh, I'm tired of political, being politically correct, and I just want to be able to say things," and it's used as like an excuse to be able to just say very rude, disrespectful, denigrating things without consequence, and that's not okay. And they don't view it as an act of racism or something that is wrong. They view it as just like sharing their opinion. But that adds to that racial trauma element. That adds to someone not being safe in their environment. I know too many people who have had to go to therapy because their white coworkers have not treated them with the respect and the dignity that they just deserve as humans. And I wish that I could say that this is specific to Liberty. I wish that I could say that this is just something that is ingrained in institutions that were founded on racist principles. But I can't, because I've met too many other Black professionals who have similar stories. And it's one thing to say that you are in support of Black people and you're in support of their rights and you're in support of equality. It's a whole different thing to act it out day to day. It's a whole different thing to be in the workplace, and when you see something happening that's wrong, speak up or correct somebody else. Because let me tell you, Black people are tired, and I cannot say that enough. I cannot express that enough. We are tired. We are exhausted. We have, like, our whole lives, we build up this defense to protect ourselves from this world that actively works against us, and we have to like tune some of it out, and we have to decide which battles we're going to face, because often when we're in those spaces, we're the only ones who are fighting for us. And I will say this, as somebody who grew up in all of these different spaces, who grew up in, I grew up in predominantly white neighborhoods, but I also grew up in predominantly Black neighborhoods. I've been, at predominantly white schools. I've been at predominantly Black schools. I've been at mixtures of schools. I've been private, public, and I've seen a commonality in all of them. And that is that Black people are trying to make it home here in this country, be able to live and thrive and exist without opposition to just their humanity. So if I could encourage you, I would definitely encourage you you know, if you truly are wanting to help support your Black, you know, neighbors and brethren, sistren, folks, I encourage you to speak up in all the ways. I I told somebody the other day, and I reiterated it on this on my friend's podcast. If you are white and you're going to go vote, some of the simplest things you can do is stop voting in your own interests. And I know that feels super uncomfortable, and that may be like, what? You know, everybody votes for their own interests. Let me just tell you this, white people, you will be okay. I promise you. I will give you every plant in my home, and these are my children. I love them. You will be okay. Okay, like you can go and vote, and the very like DNA of our nation is built to support and protect you. When you look at political parties and they're going back and forth, who is fighting? It's, you know, rich liberal white people fighting rich conservative white people, fighting about whose white matters more and who's going to get this or who's going to get that. And then every so often they may say, oh, also we support the Black people or the gay people or the Latinos. And it's just like, okay, but are you really? And that doesn't just, you know, that doesn't just go for, um, you know, the presidential elections. It goes for your local elections. It goes for school board. It goes for all of those different ways that you should show. I went to a city council meeting when they were talking about the curfew, and I could not believe the way that some of those city council members were speaking. And I was like, who elected these people? Who has allowed them to speak on behalf of the community that they're supposed to protect and that they're supposed to represent for this long? Who allowed this to happen? And I'm like, this doesn't it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel okay. I know that that may be uncomfortable for some people to kind of, you know, think about, but I just I can't express enough how much white people, you will always be okay in this nation. But if you are wanting to do something, if you're wanting to stand up, then please stop looking out for your own interests. I know it's a natural thing for us to do all as humans. I know that it's a natural thing for us to want to do to protect ourselves, our own livelihood, our own good. But trust me, you are protected. You're taken care of. But there are people in this country who are not protected, who are not taken care of. You need only look at how our education system is set up and look at how history is taught and revised. And we don't want people to know about the systems of oppression that this country is built off of. We do everything we can to protect whiteness and to protect the white experience, but it's time that we start looking at marginalized communities in our nation and doing what we can to protect them. So I will kind of hop off my soapbox there. Pastor Dan, I think you had some questions.
Yes. No, first, I just want to say, Quan, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for coming into this group, albeit virtually, and just laying it out as it is, not holding back, or though you may be holding back some, but being able to be as honest as you are is just uncomfortable, I think, for people, for all of us that have benefited from majority culture white privilege. But at the same time, you know, while heartbreaking, the truth telling is part of the process. Like, how do we move forward? And I'm just so grateful to you, and I know this group is, and they would immediately unmute themselves and begin talking, but I don't want to do that just yet. I would like to reserve that for the very end if you're still around here in just a few more minutes, and then people that may have side questions can ask those or comments. But Quan, I just am in awe of you. I am in awe of what you've been able to do. I think of Larisha Hawkins putting on the hijab when she was at Wheaton College just a few years back, and how she, as a person of color, puts on a hijab or a headscarf just at a Christian university in order to sympathize and to be with, stand in solidarity with, again, another marginalized people group in the country. Then gets her subsequently let go. I mean, she's fired in the end, and was the first person of color tenured at Wheaton College, which was set up as an abolitionist college in the 1800s, a Christian abolitionist college. So what's happened is that, I mean, obviously, even those that seem to be well-intending, they feel like they're doing a favor to all of us by helping guide the moral compass and bringing us enlightenment within our own religiousness or our own walk spiritually, somehow fumble on some of the most I guess the deep-seated things that you were talking about, that cultural racism that's just so ingrained in us. And I was thinking about Larisha having to overcome those, and I'm thinking about you. You're at the largest Christian university, largely white, very a decreasing amount of minorities attending the school, and it's just been kind of growing. And then to hear your chief administrator say, "I don't even know those people," as they walk out. I mean, you're invisible to me. It just pains me to think of the invisibility factor that happens. And I just wanted, if you would be able to speak a little bit to that invisibility that you feel, have felt, you know.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's definitely something that I think a lot of spaces struggle with: tokenism. You only bring your people of color, your marginalized groups out when it feels comfortable or when you can gain something from it. And then otherwise you want them to sit on the shelf. You know, you want them to just sit there and be quiet. And when I told the executive vice president, when I was, turning in my letter, I said, I'm very conflicted here, because you've told me and everyone else that works underneath you that you want us to work and work hard. And you want to know that people aren't just twiddling their thumbs at a desk. But you've also allowed for people beneath you to ask us to do just that. To just sit here and be quiet and not speak up, and to not talk about the very real issues that are in existence here, and then perform our job duties as outlined in our job description, and so it's much easier to ignore people of color than address what they have to say, especially when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's in opposition with everything that you've been taught and that you have learned, and that, you want to believe about the world.
Wow. Yeah. I was going to say, one of our friends in common posed to me a question. She said, white people are coming out into the streets right now for Black Lives Matter, even in Lynchburg. And when I say white people, I also say heteronormative, folks that are in this main majority culture acceptance. There's some that are coming out and supporting Black Lives Matter. But the question she raised to me was, where are they going to be after this? Are they willing to put their money where their demonstrations are, at least right now? It's a fad, it's a trend to join in, especially for liberals. And that's it. I mean, a lot of us are progressive liberals. And so there's this kind of, you know, it's a trend, it's a fad. We have no problem saying Black Lives Matter, and a lot of us are willing to do everything we can. But when it comes to, and that was the question she posed me, very hard question. She said, Dan, are they willing to invest? Are they willing to go as far as reparations? Are they willing to really work towards true systemic equities? Are they really willing to give up their own financial comforts in order to bring people into an equalized opportunity? And so there was some real hard, challenging questions she was giving me, and I really appreciated it. I have no doubts that she's probably said some of those things to you or in some conversation in some form. But what would you say to that? What are you willing to challenge the status quo majority culture to do to help bring about real change, not just
Yeah.
in Christian universities, not just in churches, but communities, our communities in large?
Yeah, I would say again, like online is not enough. Hashtags aren't enough. I think we have more than moved past that. Don't just accept your local government saying that, okay, well now we'll recognize Juneteenth as progress. That's something that should have been happening long ago. Don't settle for crumbs when you know we deserve a lot more. And just as basic humans, um, when you see inequality is happening again in your own spaces, in your own neighborhoods, if you see that there's a predominantly white school down the street and there's a predominantly Black school down the other street, and you know that one of those schools are being clearly underfunded, or that they aren't being given as many opportunities, speak up and change it and do the work. Um, when you see that there is inequity in your neighborhood and in your environment, I think that's the easiest way for all of us to start. Because if you try and tackle national issues, I think you see how quickly that can get exasperating, that you can feel like you're not really getting anywhere, no one's really hearing you. But on the local level, there's so much that we can all do. If there are if you know that there's a Black business owner who maybe just needs some help with getting connected with a good marketing team that will help them get their image out, and a ton of different marketing teams, make the connections. If that maybe there are even inequities in the foster care system, or like there are just so many different opportunities for us to get our hands dirty and to dive in and do the work. And it's right in your city. Lynchburg has a poverty rate that is higher than most other Virginia cities. Okay, 24501 is one of the poorest zip codes in Virginia. And the poverty rate disparity is almost double that for Black people in our city versus white people. You have work to do right here in your community.
Thank you, Quan. Thank you so much. Quan, are you able to? I can look for it, but if you're able to put you're still running the Underground Railroad Fund, and this is to help folks who feel like they can't leave the system that they know is oppressing them and want to. And that's right. Is that right? The fund is specifically to help those people.
It's for them. Not a single dime goes to me. It only goes to employees who are resigning from the institution due to racial trauma. We're working to get them to safer environments. I don't want to just give them money and say, okay, now go into a city without a job that is already facing, an economic recession and sorry, excuse me, has yet to rebound from the 2009 recession. Like, I'm also trying to get connected with local employers and get connected with local higher education institutions and those across the Virginia state, because I want for these people to be able to safely transition into a better, more healthy work environment, where they hopefully will not have to deal with it to the degree that they are at Liberty. While, I know that these issues exist in a lot of different workplaces, across a lot of different fields, the experience at Liberty is a lot different. it's a lot different. There's so much just hate that is, and there's no other way I can put it, hate that is woven through the everyday experience.
Quan, thank you so much for sharing again with us today. Man, the frankness is just unbelievable and extremely helpful to move us forward. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Pastor Dan. Thank you all for letting me share this space with you. Seriously, thank you.